Hey there, everybody. Hit your good pal Dustin back with another episode of Turn It Around. We are on episode 55. We are having so many episodes in, more episodes than I ever thought I would ever do. And I appreciate all of your support, all of your views, everything. I just appreciate you. We are continuing. My nose itches. We are continuing on the parables of Jesus. This one's going to be just a smidgen different, and you'll see why in a minute. So, we're on episode 255. Hope everybody had a good day. Hope everybody had a good Sunday. If you went to church, I hope you were blessed at church, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your day. And I hope this video helps with that. So, without further ado, here we go. So, parables using everyday life. The reason this is going to be a little different is I'm going to do multiple parables in this because some of these were super short, so I felt like I could just condense them all into this one video. So, parables using everyday life. We're doing Matthew 13, 33 through 34. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. Matthew 13:44, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Matthew 13:45 through 46, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So, it was important to Jesus, and it was important for his listeners, because in the whole of Matthew 13, Jesus used parables using scenes from people's everyday lives, things people would see walking down the street, looking out a window, just things people would see just going about their day. It was important because it was so his listeners could more easily relate to his words. These things were familiar to his listeners, and he intended to use these scenes that were familiar not only to help his listeners more easily relate, but to also lead people to things that had never before entered their minds. So now you're probably wondering, well, what are the things? What were the things that never entered their minds before? Well, guess what? I'm going to tell you. Treasures on land and in the sea. So in Matthew 13:44, Jesus tells the parable of the treasure found by a man in a field. Now, obviously, finding treasure in a field isn't an everyday occurrence. But, you've probably seen videos of people finding things on a beach or in a field that just been lost to time and ended up having something valuable in it. You can find those videos on TikTok, on YouTube, probably just about anywhere you can think of. So, but while it is not an incredibly common occurrence, it is something that people would have seen. But what is the things that would have never entered their mind? Well, you needed to think about what each thing in the parable represented. Like the field represents the world. Jesus represents the man, and the individual believer, us, is the treasure. And in the same vein, Matthew 13:45 through 46, Jesus is the buyer of the pearl, and the pearl is the believer. In both parables, the man, Jesus, was willing to give everything he had to hold on to the treasure he had found. To Jesus and to God, we are worth anything to save. Jesus gave the most important thing to a human, that being their life. Jesus gave his life in order to save his treasure, to save us. This is such a beautiful visual that somebody, Jesus, a man who stepped down out of heaven, who likely had everything he could have ever wanted in heaven, he gave all of that up so that he could come to earth to sacrifice his life, experience immense pain and suffering, all to make sure we, his treasure, could be with him in heaven someday. God and Jesus love us, and loved us so much. They sacrificed everything a person could imagine just so that we could be with them in heaven someday. Now, the last one we did uses a scene that's close to home. Even today, the scene of a mother or a grandmother in the kitchen baking would probably be seen as a common thing. Now, excuse me. Obviously, most people nowadays don't make bread from scratch. But I do know that my mother has talked about her mother, my grandmother, baking bread from scratch when she was younger. So you can imagine my grandmother in the kitchen kneading the dough, kneading the yeast, or the leaven as it would be called in other translations, into the dough. Now, what does that do? The yeast is what makes the dough rise, the bread rise, and makes it spongy and porous and nom 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 nom. That is what makes the bread taste good and soft and just chef's kiss. Now back in, I'm just going to say in Jewish culture, I don't know if it's still the case today, but at least back then, leaven was seen as a representation of sin being worked into the world, the dough. That is why, during the Passover, all leaven in the house needed to be found and burned, and they didn't use leaven in the bread, and that's, you get the Passover bread, that flat, cardboard looking stuff. Doesn't have a good taste. It's just, no person, I highly doubt a person would eat that kind of bread every day. Maybe I'm wrong, but I find it hard to believe that anyone would eat that bread every day. But that is why, during the Passover, that is why all of the leaven which for back then, the leaven was actually dough from a previous bread making that had what's the word? I'm sure you all know what word I'm trying to say that I can't think of right now because my brain doesn't want to work. But I'm just going to say matured, and matured, and that's worked into the new bread. And of course, I don't know if that, I don't think that's yeast now, but if it is, there you go. So, at least back then, the yeast or leaven was dough from a previous bread making. So, that back then or in Jewish culture is seen as sin entering the world. And even some Christian scholars look at this parable as describing sin being worked into the world and corrupting the world and the people in it. But others could also describe it as Christianity itself changing the world for the better. I personally prefer that one. I think that one represents it more. Even though in Jewish culture the leaven is seen as sin, I think it works better as being described as Christianity being worked into the world and changing the world for the better. Excuse me. And the reason I think this, and this isn't to say anything bad about Jewish culture or anything like that, but like I said, nobody wants to eat unleavened bread because it's flat, it looks like cardboard, it tastes like cardboard. It's not a pleasant experience to eat. Whereas when it is leavened, it is spongy, it is soft, it is porous, and it is tasty. That is preferred. That is good. So, whereas I think in some cases you could describe the leaven as sin, I think Jesus was explaining it more in the sense of Christianity or his teachings being worked into the world to change it for the better. The leaven, the yeast, could both be attributed to sin hiding in the world and corrupting it. The reason some people think it is describing sin is because in one translation, it says that the woman hides the leaven in the dough. Now, of course, we all know things get lost in translation. So, yeah, it could just be a thing lost in that particular translation. It's hard to say. Let's see, I'm using the NIV. Oh, nope, one more. So, yeast that a woman took and mixed into. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what makes bread that we know. In other translations, it says the woman took and hid into the 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Now, like I said, if you go by that translation, then yes, you could say it is sin hiding in the world and corrupting it. But if you go by the NIV translation, and I'm sure other translations, the woman just took the leaven and mixed it into the dough. And it could be seen as Jesus kneading his words, his teachings, Christianity into the world to change people and lead them away from the corrupting influence of sin. And if you have ever made bread, you know that it is a patience game. You can't just go drip, 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 and then you're done. You need it. I don't even know how long, because I've never made bread. But I can only imagine you have to knead it for good 15, maybe even 30 minutes. But I don't know. Like I said, I've never made bread. If any of you have made bread and you know for sure, you can let me know in the comments, because I don't know. But I imagine it's not a thing you can just like do 1, 2, 3 and you're done. I'm sure you have to do it a lot. And it's a game of patience. If you don't have the patience to do it a lot, you're not going to get the yeast or the leaven worked into the dough enough and your bread's going to turn out flat and cardboard. Like flat cardboard and taste like cardboard. Now, like Jesus did during his life, we need to continue to need his words, his teachings, his messages into our world to save and lead people from sin. Another reason I think this parable is talking about Christianity rather than sin is because Christianity doesn't hide. Sin does. Sin hides to corrupt people subtly. We can see what happens to the dough, to the bread when the leaven, when the yeast is worked into it. We can see the bread rise. We can feel the bread's soft and porousness, and we can taste how good it is. That is what Christianity does. It doesn't hide. It charges headlong into the darkness of the world to bring light to the world. We are soldiers on the front lines in the battle of good and evil. And every time we fail to bring God's words to people is a victory for evil. We need to continue to spread and work Jesus' teachings into and through our world so that people can be changed, people can be saved, people can be free of sin. That is what we are called to do, my friends. We are God's soldiers on this earth. And the battles are hard. And sometimes they take a lot of patience. But with every victory we achieve a victory for good, for God, and for His grace and holiness and love. And that, my friends, is a beautiful thing. I thank you all again for listening to my videos. I appreciate your time, appreciate your eyes on my videos. And if you like my videos, please share them with others so that others can be blessed by God's words, by the meaning behind those words. Please continue to like the videos, subscribe if you haven't already. It helps with the YouTube algorithm that unfortunately I am a slave to if I want to get these videos out to more people. And I can only do that with your help, with your likes, your subscriptions, and your views. So thank you again. And remember always that I love you, God loves you, and please remember to love yourselves and those around you. Until next week, my friends. Bye!